I did not say a word. I did not push back my chair. I did not excuse myself from the table. I sat there, very still, the way I have learned to sit through things that require stillness. And I watched my son-in-law take the menu out of my daughter's hands and set it down on the other side of his plate, like it was a toy she wasn't supposed to have. My daughter looked at her empty hands for a moment. Then she looked at me. I smiled at her. That was all I did. But on the inside something shifted. The way a lock turns, quiet, precise, and final. I should tell you who my daughter is before I tell you what happened to her. Her name is Vivian. She is 31 years old, and she has been the kind of person who fills a room since she was approximately 4, when she marched into her preschool orientation and informed the teacher that she had already read the books on the shelf, and could she please have different ones. The teacher called me afterward. She wasn't complaining. She was laughing. Vivian grew up in our house in Columbus, Ohio, with her father and me and her younger brother, and she had opinions about everything: the news, the neighbours, the best route to take to the farmer's market, the correct way to load a dishwasher. Her father and I did not always agree with her opinions, but we never told her to stop having them. She studied accounting at Ohio State. She got her CPA license at 25. She was sharp and funny, and she could spot a discrepancy in a spreadsheet the way some people can hear a note played off key. Immediately, without effort, without needing to be told. I retired from the school district 3 years ago after 34 years in administration. My late husband Gerald passed in 2019. Since then it has been Vivian and her brother Marcus and me, and we have been careful with each other in the way that families are careful when they have lost someone and do not want to lose anyone else. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand who Vivian was before she met my son-in-law. And I want you to understand who she was becoming by the time I understood what was happening. His name is Brandon. She met him at a work conference in Cincinnati. He was a regional manager for a logistics company. 41 years younger than charming was how I thought of him the first time she brought him home, which I now understand was not a compliment disguised as one. It was just a fact I hadn't finished processing yet. He was tall. He dressed well. He remembered details. What I had said I was reading, what Marcus had mentioned about his job, what Vivian had told him I used to bake at Christmas. At dinner, he asked me questions and listened to the answers. He made Gerald's absence feel acknowledged, without making it feel like a performance. I liked him. That's the part that still sits with me. I liked him. His mother, Renee, I met a few weeks later. She was 63, recently remarried, and she had the quality some women have of making every conversation feel like it is being conducted for an audience. She was not unkind to me. She was cordial in a way that is very close to kind, but is actually something else entirely. She told me Vivian was wonderful. She told me Brandon had never been happier. She said, and I remember this exactly, "I've been praying for a woman who knows how to take care of a home. Brandon needs that." Vivian was a CPA with her own apartment and a retirement account, and an IRA she had been funding since she was 26. I said, "She's very capable." Renee smiled and said, "Of course she is." That was the end of it. Or I thought it was. They got engaged 14 months after the conference. The ring was beautiful. Vivian called me from the parking lot of the restaurant where he proposed, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. And I sat on my couch and cried a little too, the way you do when your child is happy and you want to hold that happiness in both hands. They moved in together 6 months before the wedding. Vivian's apartment, her name on the lease. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be honest with you, I noticed it and I told myself I was being too watchful, too ready to find fault. The way widowed mothers sometimes are with their children's partners because we have lost so much already and we are trying to protect what's left. The first thing I noticed was that Vivian stopped finishing her sentences when Brandon was in the room. Not always. Not dramatically. Just a small habit that developed like a hairline crack in a wall you've been staring at for months. She would start to tell a story, and if Brandon had a version of the story, he would pick it up from her. And she would let him. She would sit back and let him tell it. I noticed. I did not say anything. The second thing I noticed was the money. Vivian had always been careful with money. Careful in the way that people are when they understand money, not in the way that people are when they are afraid of it. She knew what she had, she knew what she spent, and she knew where the difference went. About 4 months after they moved in together, she mentioned offhandedly that they had set up a joint account for household expenses. This is normal. Married couples do this all the time. I did not think anything of it. 3 months later, she mentioned that she had started putting her direct deposit into the joint account. I asked if she still had her personal account. She paused. Just a half a second, but I have known this child for 31 years and I know her pauses. We're combining everything, she said. It's easier that way. Brandon manages the finances. He's good at it. You're a CPA, I said. She laughed. It was a short laugh. I know, Mom, but he likes doing it, and it's one less thing for me to worry about. I said that sounded reasonable. It did not sound reasonable, but I had learned by then that saying so would not help, and that Vivian would tell me I was being controlling, and that Brandon would be very polite about it, which would somehow make everything worse. So I said nothing. I want to pause here and explain something that I could not have explained to you then, only now, looking back. When someone you love is being slowly reshaped, it does not happen the way you think it will. You think you will see it clearly. You think you will know. But the reshaping happens in small increments, and each increment on its own looks like nothing, a preference, a habit, a compromise. And by the time the picture is clear enough to name, the person is already standing in the middle of it, calling it their life. And if you go in too early, too directly, too forcefully, you become the problem. You become the reason she pulls away. You become the one she is managing, apologizing for, explaining to him late at night when she thinks you can't hear the strain in her voice. I had spent 34 years working with children in crisis. I knew how coercive control works. I had sat in school board meetings where we discussed warning signs, resource lists, intervention protocols. None of that prepared me for watching it happen to my daughter, because this is the thing they do not tell you. Knowing what it is does not make it easier to stop. It makes it lonelier. The wedding was in April. It was a small ceremony, 40 people, a venue in Powell, Ohio, just north of Columbus. Vivian wore a dress that had a long, open back, and she looked exactly like herself, bright and laughing, and I stood at the edge of the reception thinking that I was being paranoid, that this was a good day and I should let it be good. Renee gave a toast that was technically about Vivian and was actually about Brandon, about how much he deserved this, about how he had waited for the right woman. I drank my champagne. The changes after the wedding were not dramatic. That is important to say. There was no single scene, no slamming door, no terrible moment that I could point to and say, that is when it became something else. It was more like weather. Vivian stopped coming to Sunday dinners as regularly. At first it was once a month, then every other week. Brandon had things. Family obligations on his side. A game he wanted to watch. She was tired. She stopped talking about work. Vivian had always talked about work. Not complaining, just narrating, the way people do when they find what they do genuinely interesting. One evening, I asked her how a particular audit had gone, something she'd mentioned a few weeks earlier, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately name and said, "I'm actually thinking about stepping back from work for a while." I set down my coffee cup. "Stepping back," I said. "Just taking a break. Brandon makes enough. And I've been tired lately." She looked at her hands. "He thinks it would be good for me." "What do you think?" I asked. She looked up. For a moment she looked like herself, sharp, present, a little impatient with a question that had an obvious answer. Then something smoothed over. I think he's probably right, she said. I drove home that night and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. I thought about the woman who had read every book on the preschool shelf and asked for harder ones. I thought about the 25-year-old who had called me from the exam centre the afternoon she passed her CPA exam, voice shaking, saying, "Mom, I did it. I actually did it." I thought about the person who understood money better than anyone I knew, who was now giving her paycheck to her husband to manage, and thinking about quitting her career because he thought it would be good for her. I did not sleep well. I started paying closer attention. Not in an obvious way. I was not going to make myself the problem. I invited Vivian to things rather than pressing her when she declined. I kept our phone calls warm and low stakes. I asked about her, not about him. I made it easy for her to come to me. And slowly, the way you see something in your peripheral vision that you can't quite make out until you turn your head, I started to see it. The way she apologized before she gave an opinion. I might be wrong about this, but she had never said that before, not once in 31 years. The way she laughed at herself when she told a story. A small, preemptive laugh, as if she were bracing for the correction. The way she once reached for the last piece of bread at my dinner table and then stopped and put her hand back in her lap. "Take the bread, Vivian," I said. "I'm fine," she said. She was not fine. It was Marcus who told me about the bruise. He had stopped by her apartment one afternoon, unannounced, the way siblings do, and she answered the door in a cardigan even though it was 74 degrees outside. Marcus had grown up watching his father fix things with his hands, and he had grown up watching me notice things, and he put those two pieces of his upbringing together in the car on the way home and called me before he reached the end of her street. "She had long sleeves on, Mum, in July." I asked if he was sure. She hugs me goodbye and her sleeves slid up a little. There was something on her upper arm. She pulled it down fast. I thanked him. I told him to let me handle it. I sat with that phone call for 3 days. I want to tell you what I did not do, because I think this matters as much as what I did do. I did not call Brandon. I did not call Renee. I did not show up at their apartment and demand answers. I did not give Vivian an ultimatum. I did not cry to her, or beg, or make it about my fear. All of those things would have pushed her further in. What I did was call my doctor. She had become a friend over 20 years. And I said I needed to talk about something, and it wasn't about me. She cleared her afternoon, and then I called a woman I had worked with years ago at the district, who now ran a domestic violence resource centre on the east side of Columbus. We had not spoken in 2 years. She picked up on the second ring. I did not ask them what I should do. I asked them what my daughter might be thinking, what she might be afraid of, why someone smart and capable ends up somewhere she cannot name as dangerous. I had my own ideas, 34 years of them, but I needed to hear it from people who had done this longer and more directly than I had. They told me things I already knew, and they told me things I didn't, and by the end of it, I had a different kind of clarity than the one that comes from anger. It was cooler than anger, more useful. I asked Vivian to come have lunch with me on a Saturday in August. Just lunch. I made the chicken soup she has liked since she was 7. I did not bring up Brandon. I did not bring up work or money or the cardigan in July. I talked about Marcus and his new apartment in Clintonville. I talked about a book I had read. I asked her to tell me something she had noticed lately. Anything, a song she'd heard, something funny, anything. She thought for a minute. And then she told me about a podcast she had been listening to late at night. True crime, she said. She couldn't sleep. I asked why she couldn't sleep. She looked at her soup. "I don't know," she said. "My mind just runs." "What does it run about?" A very long pause. "Whether I made the right choices," she said. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I think that's one of the bravest things a person can think about." She looked up, noticing whether something is right, I said. "Some people never do." She didn't say anything. but she stayed for 3 hours that afternoon. And when she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time, longer than she had in months. The Thanksgiving dinner was Brandon's family's. Renee hosted. It was at her house in Ghana, a large house, recently renovated, the kind of house where everything is beautiful and nothing is particularly comfortable. Vivian had invited me. I think she needed me there. I think she needed me there. I think she knew, on some level, that she needed a witness. Renee had cooked a full dinner. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes with the marshmallows on top, green bean casserole, rolls. It was a lot of food, and she wanted you to know that it was a lot of food. She mentioned it several times. There were 8 of us at the table. Brandon's stepfather, his 2 younger brothers and their wives, Renee, Vivian and Brandon and me. We were about 20 minutes into the meal when Vivian began to say something about a news story she had read. Something about supply chain and the logistics industry, which was Brandon's industry and which Vivian had been tracking because she had clients in distribution. She was mid-sentence when Brandon said, without looking up from his plate, "That's not actually what the article said." Vivian stopped. "You didn't finish reading it," he said. "I saw you close the tab." She said quietly, "I read the whole thing." He turned to his brother and continued the conversation as if she hadn't spoken. I watched Renee. She was cutting her turkey. She did not look up, but the corner of her mouth lifted. Barely, just enough, and she said, to no one in particular, "Brandon's always been the reader in the family." There was a small ripple of laughter. Vivian looked at her plate. I looked at Vivian. Then I set down my fork. Not dramatically, just placed it on the edge of my plate, gently, and I said in my normal voice, "Vivian, I'd love to hear more about what you read, the supply chain story." The table shifted slightly, the way a room does when something has been named that everyone was pretending not to see. Brandon looked at me. He had a very specific smile. I had seen it before, warm on the surface with something calculating behind it. He said, "She gets things mixed up sometimes, it's all right." I said, "She doesn't." Not loudly. I have never needed to raise my voice to be heard. 34 years of school board meetings. She has a CPA license and she's been in financial auditing for 6 years, I said. She doesn't get things mixed up. The table was quiet. Vivian was looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It was more like recognition, like someone hearing their own name spoken after a long time of being called something else. Brandon said pleasantly, "I think we can all just enjoy dinner." "We certainly can," I said, and picked up my fork. In the car on the way home, Vivian called me. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. Silence. "He's going to be in a terrible mood," she said. "I know that too," I said. "Vivian, are you all right?" Another silence. Longer. "I don't know," she said. That was the most honest thing she had said to me in over a year. I said, "When you're ready to talk, I'm here, not to tell you what to do, just to listen. And if you want information about anything at all, I can get it for you." She said okay. She said she had to go. I sat in my car, in my own driveway for a little while after we hung up, and I thought about patience, and what it costs, and what it protects. She came to me 6 weeks later. It was a Tuesday night in December. She showed up at my door at 9 o'clock with a bag over her shoulder, and her eyes red, and she said, "I need to stay for a while." I said, "Your room is ready." I did not ask her what happened. I made her tea, and I let her sit at my kitchen table, and I sat across from her, and we talked until almost 2 in the morning, and she told me things she had not said out loud before, not to me, not to Marcus, not to anyone. The money. The sleep she wasn't getting, the walking on eggshells so constant she had stopped noticing the eggshells, the long sleeves, the explanation she had ready every time. And then she was quiet for a while, and she said, "I knew something was wrong. I think I knew for a long time. I just didn't want it to be what it was. I know, I said. You knew too, she said. Yes, I said. Why didn't you? Because you had to be the one to come to this door, I said. Not me, you. She looked at me. I would have been there every step of the way, I said. But it had to be your step. What followed was not a movie. I want to be clear about that. It was slow and it was hard, and there were days Vivian second-guessed herself, and days she cried and days she said she wasn't sure she could do it. But she had her name on the lease. She had a CPA license that had not expired. She had a brother who moved furniture and changed the locks. She had a friend from college who was a family law attorney in Dublin, Ohio, who met her for coffee and quietly explained her options. I had documentation. I want to say this carefully because it matters. I had dates. I had photographs, not of Vivian, but of things I had observed, written down, recorded as you record things when you have spent 34 years in school administration and you understand that the paperwork is always what saves you. I had a log that went back 11 months. I had texts Vivian had sent me, not knowing I had saved them, that told a story when you read them in sequence. We did not need all of it, but having it meant we were ready. Brandon contested the separation. He was very pleasant about it. At first, the way he was always pleasant, surface level and deliberate. Then he was less pleasant. His lawyer sent letters. Renee called me once, in February, and told me I had destroyed her son's marriage. I listened to her. I let her finish. Then I said, I didn't destroy anything. I helped my daughter find the door. I wished her well. I meant it, actually. I do not have the energy for anything else. Vivian moved into a new apartment in March, German Village, south of downtown Columbus, a neighborhood she had always loved. She went back to work full-time in January. Her firm took her back without a second's hesitation, and her supervisor sent me an email I did not ask for, because Vivian had mentioned that I had helped her, and her supervisor just wanted me to know. I keep that email in a folder. She is not perfectly fine. I would not tell you she is. She is in therapy. A good therapist, someone who specializes in exactly this kind of recovery. And there are still hard weeks, and there are still dreams she does not want to tell me about, and she still sometimes catches herself apologizing before she says something, and she has to consciously stop and take back the apology. But she is Vivian again. Last Sunday she came to dinner, and she argued with Marcus for 40 minutes about whether Columbus has good pizza. She says yes. He says the bars are set too low, and I sat at the head of my table and watched them and thought about all the Sundays we had gotten through, and the ones that were ahead of us. She reached for the last piece of bread. She did not stop. She just took it. I am telling you this because someone needs to hear it. Maybe you are a mother sitting across from a daughter whose eyes have gone quiet. Maybe you are watching someone you love shrink so slowly that you cannot point to the moment it started. Maybe you are the person in the long sleeves telling yourself it's not what it is. Here is what I know. You cannot force someone to see it before they are ready. What you can do is stay close. Stay warm. Make yourself someone safe to come to, not someone they have to manage. Leave the door open, literally, if you have to. And let them know, without drama, without ultimatums, without your fear becoming their burden, that you will be there when they come to it. Document what you see. Write down dates. Save the messages. Not as evidence of anything yet, just as a record, because memory is imperfect and clarity is something you will want later, and love them loudly enough that they can hear it through whatever they are living through. That is the only tool I knew for certain would work. I'm glad I did not put it down. If this story reached you today, I want to ask you something before you go. What did you notice in this story that you have seen somewhere in your own life, and wherever you're listening from? What city are you in tonight? Leave it in the comments. I read everyone. This is Echo Tales, and these stories are real. I've thought about this a lot in the months since Vivian moved into her apartment in German Village, about what made the difference, about what could have gone differently if I'd moved faster or slower, or in the wrong direction entirely. What I keep coming back to is this. The damage Brandon did to my daughter was not random. It was the result of a series of choices repeated daily over a long period of time. And the recovery she is living now is also the result of a series of choices. Hers mostly, but some of them mine. That is how cause and effect actually works in real life. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a warning. It accumulates quietly, the way interest does, for good or for bad, depending on what you are putting in. Vivian was not weak. I want to say that clearly. People who have not been in her situation sometimes wonder how a smart woman ends up somewhere like that. The answer is that intelligence does not protect you from someone who is patient and deliberate and has decided that your confidence is something to be managed. Brandon did not attack Vivian's intelligence. He redirected it. He made her doubt the instrument of her own judgment so gradually that she stopped trusting the readings. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is what a certain kind of person does to intelligence when they feel threatened by it. What saved her, what I believe truly saved her, was that she had not lost the habit of noticing, even when she couldn't name what she was noticing, even when she was explaining it away. Some part of her was still keeping score, still tracking the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. That is what brought her to my door on a Tuesday night in December with a bag over her shoulder. Not me, not Marcus, her. She noticed and she acted on what she noticed, and that is a form of courage that does not always get called by that name. I think about Renee too, not with anger. I am genuinely past that, but with a kind of sober curiosity. She watched her son do what he did and she chose to smooth it over, laugh at the right moments, defend him when I called it what it was. She called me in February and told me I had destroyed his marriage, and I thought about what it costs a person to look at something clearly and choose instead to protect the story that lets them sleep. That cost is not paid once. It is paid every time. What I want to say to anyone watching this, anyone who recognizes something in Vivian's story, in the long sleeves in July, in the pauses before she spoke, in the apologies before every opinion, is that clarity is not disloyalty. Seeing something for what it is does not mean you failed to love someone hard enough. Sometimes it means exactly the opposite. And if you are the one standing on the outside, watching someone you love shrink, I want you to know that patience is not the same as passivity. Keeping the door warm is not the same as doing nothing. The most important thing I did for my daughter was make sure she knew, without a single doubt, that I would be there when she was ready. Not before. When? She reached for the bread on her own. That was always going to be the only way it could work.